966.
This is the 966 episode 62. Mr. Richard Wilson, hello.
Mr. Lucien Ziegler, hey, 62.
62. Yeah, we're keeping them going. This week, Richard, we've got Colby Connelly as our guest. We'll be talking about oil markets, the big kerfuffle here in the United States caused by the OPEC Plus decision. Some more on that hot topic in just a few moments with Colby. Really a great conversation, Richard, you have coming up. There's also a lot of other stuff going on that we want to get to this week. Richard, new statistics on Saudi Arabia's population. We'll be talking about Riyadh season 2022, which kicks off next week, and more. Before we get going, subscribe to us wherever you're getting this. There's a red button on YouTube. It says subscribe. We really appreciate it when you do that there. And on Apple Podcasts as well. 29 platforms still, Richard.
Jeez,
we are not getting
episode.
to the 30th. I know. We're almost to 30. We're getting there.
Yeah, but we add one every episode, and sort of like adding listeners and countries, you know?
Yep.
966 going global.
It is going global, and we're almost 1 year old, Richard. I don't know when our birthday is, but it's got to be coming up here.
I think end of October.
October, yeah.
But also, I don't even know if I count that, because that was our first. It was almost a pilot. And then, remember, we were thinking about doing it like once a month, once every 2 weeks. And we didn't really get into the current rotation, I think, until the beginning of this year.
Yeah, I think that's right. We had a great interview with Abdullah Hassan from the G20. He was a sous Sherpa with the IMF, and it was a great conversation. And we wanted to do those, and we also wanted to do sort of episodes in this sort of format. We had no idea we'd be on YouTube, so a lot is happening and changing still with this program.
And then like a month later, we did that amazing feature with Lena Al-Maina, who I'd love to go back and revisit with all that's changed. But so those were the whole cycle, the whole frequency has evolved. So, you know, I'm still thinking we're, in terms of this format and the 966 as we know it, I count January 1 sort of as our start. So 2022.
Let's do that. And then when we ring in the new year, we'll have our anniversary to celebrate as well. We also have talked about different formats going forward, in addition to the ones we're doing, serials and more in-depth dives.
Yeah.
If there were 36 hours in every day, Richard, we might be able to do that, but we're working on expanding the team here. So we're getting to that. We're getting to that. Richard, what's your one big thing this week?
Well, before I get to that, the kerfuffle is a good one. One of the nice things about the 9.6, one of the things I like is that we're nimble. We can move quickly. Mm-hmm. And because of that, we invited Colby Connelly, who's a senior analyst with Energy Intelligence, which is one of the leading oil and gas analysis firms. I mean, 60 years old, 70 years old, but it's really well established. But he brought some really good insight on this kerfuffle, which is quite a furor. So anyway, yes, it's a good episode. But my one big thing, on May 19th, 2022, Saudi Arabia launched its fifth housing and population census. It's to be implemented by the Ministry of Health and the General Authority for Statistics. The last census was in 2010. Lucien, you may remember, we did a Yallah segment on this in May, and it discussed sort of a humorous and completely on-target government public service announcement. Do you recall that? That encouraged Saudi citizens to refrain from their natural instinct to invite census takers into their homes for food and refreshment.
Because they would never get the job done.
Exactly. So apparently the Saudis took that to heart and, you know, suppressed their, you know, sort of innate hospitality because the census is in. And when it was launched in May, they basically said that the findings and all the data would start to be rolled out this quarter, fourth quarter, so beginning in October. So we have the early sort of top line results from the 2022 census. And they are. Saudi Arabia's total population in 2021 was 34 million. That'd be a problem. 34,110,000. Up 16.8% from 2012's 29,195,000. So the annual growth rate has been 9.3%. Breakdown of the Saudi population between Saudis and non-Saudis is 19,363,000 Saudis, 14,747,000 non-Saudis. Age group below 15 years, 24.5% of the population. Between 15 and 64 years is 72% of the population. So again, that's the top line numbers. And we can expect more data to be announced, especially regarding housing, demographics, et cetera. But these are early returns on an important study. As mentioned, it was done. Last one was done in 2012, in 2010 actually. This one was delayed, obviously, because of the pandemic. So there you have it. Those are the latest big numbers from the Saudi 2022 census.
A very heavily caffeinated, highly caffeinated census. If they were unable to resist the lure of bringing in for coffee, really cool stuff, Richard. It does show that Saudi Arabia is growing very quickly. We did a sort of a featured article on this on our website, suscg.com this week, and had some data that was more forecasted from worldometers.com or worldometers.info, which I discovered during the pandemic as a really good tracker of COVID cases locally and globally. And they use some of the current numbers, like these numbers coming out, and then they forecast what's coming up next or what's going to be announced this year. So they said roughly 36 million by the end of this year, but we won't know because these numbers are from 2021. But either way, this is really cool. Really interesting stuff too on the population. 25% you said under 15, which is a key number. That's a lot of youth in Saudi Arabia, which has sort of been a thing for about a decade. But it kind of highlights how young Saudi Arabia's population is. It's not as young as it used to be, though, a few years ago. I think that it's because Saudis are having fewer kids. The nature of the family dynamic has changed a little bit. So it's a little bit more expensive now to have many, many, many children, as some Saudis do. So just really interesting stuff. Interesting stuff if you're in the B2B space, if you're in the G2G space. All this stuff is really good to know about Saudi Arabia.
And that's a good point. It'll be interesting when they come out on this, because I'll be interested to see the housing and the demographics. So, for example, all right. So birth rates might be probably declining, and why? But there'll be more nuclear families. I'm guessing, young families who aren't living with their 2 or 3 generations in a compound. They're living on their own in an apartment or a townhouse or a single family. Because there's more of that. I'm hoping it returns a lot of interesting demographic detail like that. So that is to come over this quarter.
Yep. Very, very cool.
I want to add too, 19 million Saudis, it's not a lot.
No,
I mean,
no, it's not a lot.
I think this is something that Saudi Arabia is aware of. And in terms of their planning and stuff, they're always they have to be alert to the fact. Because, so for example, if you look across the Gulf, Iran is 86 million. Look across the Red Sea, it's Egypt's 106 million. Pakistan 230 million. Obviously, on the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia is by far the largest population. I think the native population in the UAE, the Emiratis, is just over 1 million. Qataris would be significantly less than that. The point being is Saudi Arabia has never thought of itself as the kind of country that could just in terms of population is huge. And I think they try and manage their foreign relations and manage their security issues and that sort of thing with that in mind, remembering that there's still less than 20 million Saudis in the country.
And more Saudis, but less than 20 million. They're obviously in the throes of Nitakat, which is ongoing and constantly changing and updating. And actually, Richard, that's been over a decade now. I think that's been
2011.
implemented 2011. So yeah, over a decade. So I mean, that's a challenge too. Is sort of it's related to employment, but getting these Saudis into jobs and then getting these expats out of the country that were there to work. So it's a very fluid situation.
But just for our listeners or viewers, it's interesting, and we've talked about this, Mohammed bin Salman's vision down the road, 2030, 2040, is basically a 50-50 split. Mm-hmm. He sees 40 million by 2030. And when he talks about NEOM and the line and that sort of thing, and what he sees even further down the road is 50% Saudis, 50% expats. And which is an interesting vision, and I think it's a healthy vision. It's if the more capable and willing people who want to come to your country, the better for the country.
Yeah, agreed. I wonder what the split is in the U.S. for citizens and immigrants and non-citizens. I mean, the U.S. is a completely different beast, obviously, but
well, it is, and we've had generations of cycles for people, immigrants to come and then become immersed and basically just involved in the country. So we're all immigrants in essence, which I guess in the long term is going to be an interesting story for Saudi Arabia as generations unfold and decades into the future, how they deal with citizenship for a lot of these folks.
I was just about to say, yeah, what does it mean to really be Saudi? Because right now to get Saudi citizenship is not easy, whereas in the US, it's a little bit easier. I mean, not easy either, but if you're born here, you're automatically a US citizen. In Saudi Arabia, that's not the case. So yeah, the definition of Saudi identity going forward is something that MBS is focused on, but it's just an interesting thing to think about because there's enormous pride there. I mean, especially for Saudis that are, really go back, have a strong tribe identity, etc.
It is enormous pride, and it's the pride that comes from being in an emerging country, a developing country that's not very big. And I suppose it's the pride we all felt, when there were 13 colonies, of being an American vis-a-vis British or French, and that's, I'm sure that's not a good an apt analogy. I'm sure there's people who have problems with that. My point being is once again, when we look at Saudi Arabia, it's a young country, and all these things that we take for granted in terms of evolving into a nation, which is different from a country, they're either, on their way to, passing through, but not yet on the other side. So as ever, Saudi Arabia is endlessly fascinating. This will be one of the things that we'll watch to see how it resolves itself.
Indeed. Do we have any timelines on the rest of the data? Because I know some of the data was released by the Ministry of Health, I think. I could have that wrong.
They took the lead on this. Yeah.
It
just said, and the May announcement said it'd start coming out and beginning in October and into the fourth quarter. So I assume we'll see more of this. This was the first we've seen of it.
Yeah, so a little bit of a trickle as they process it. It takes the census people a long time to do their work here in the U.S. So, yep, very interesting. Richard, my one big thing this week, speaking of youth, Riyadh season 2022 is coming up. It's going to be lit. Big announcement yesterday from the chairman of the board of directors of the General Entertainment Authority, the GEA, Turki Al-Sheikh, one of the more interesting guys in Saudi. We've done a segment on him. Soccer club owner. He's the guy, I was thinking about this, Richard. He's sort of like the master of ceremonies of all the entertainment things going on in Saudi. So probably has a very interesting job, would make a great documentary. So he confirmed yesterday the start of the Riyadh season, which is October 21st next week, and revealing some interesting details about what's in store this year. Context first, Richard, you and I know this, but the Riyadh season is in its third edition. It's sort of like a citywide fair and festival that lasts for months, not just days or weeks. And it takes place in various forms across different neighborhoods all across Riyadh. This year, it will take place in 15 separate areas across the Saudi capital, part of Vision 2030's broader goal of making Saudi Arabia a more attractive place to live and visit. And this year, there is something for everyone at every age. On to the deets, which were revealed. First, the season will be kicked off by a performance from Cirque du Soleil, which is cool, obviously. Two of the main entertainment and dining areas, the Boulevard Riyadh City and the Boulevard World, which are two separate areas, are kind of new. The Boulevard Riyadh City is year-round. It's restaurants. It's really cool. It's like a new promenade there. Those will be connected this year by a cable car with a capacity of up to 3,000 visitors per hour. That's new and really cool. The Boulevard Riyadh City area has been expanded to include 12 new restaurants and cafes, in addition to 25 Arab and international plays, including 7 Saudi plays. Also cool. There's a lot of cool things in this. You've got the other area, I guess, main area, Richard, which is the Winter Wonderland, and that's more like your traditional fairground that will have 5 new attractions. So that has like a Ferris wheel and rides for children and stuff. That looks really cool. It's like a carnival sort of. It's right next to King Abdullah Financial District, KAFD. It's across from the forthcoming Zaha Hadid metro station, which is awesome. That won't be in operation yet for this year, but inshallah next year they'll have that ready to go for people to visit. Riyadh season will also include the Riyadh Zoo, with more than 1,300 animals of 190 species. So that is really awesome too for the youngsters to see. good amount of sporting events as well. The World Cup kicking off right next door in Qatar in a few weeks. So Al-Sheikh announced that the Riyadh season would include the Fan Festival Zone at Mersool Park, which would accommodate 20,000 fans for each game in parallel with the exhibitions on late football star Diego Maradona on the Newcastle Club and the Newcastle Club, excuse me. So those are like little exhibits for Diego, who is a legend, and the Newcastle Club, which is now owned by the Public Investment Fund. Other sporting events, soccer demonstrations, exhibitions. So there's a lot going on, Richard, in the coming months. This is a Riyadh season. It's going to be it's going to be cool. It's going to be something that people are very excited about, and it's not something that you miss if you're out of town for a week or two. It's around all winter.
You forgot it's going to be WWE matches as well.
I did.
You had a great overview. No, this is amazing. The only quibble I have, and I don't have, it's not a quibble, but the only expansion I would say, you mentioned citywide. This is countrywide.
Mm-hmm.
People are flocking from the Eastern Province and Jeddah, from both coasts, from the South and the North, to Riyadh for this. It's become a destination event. And it's just remarkable because you mentioned first, 2019, we had 2019, 2021, and 2022. Obviously, 2020 was lost to the pandemic. It was not long ago when the height of entertainment for Saudi Arabia was the Ramadan viewing season, when they, a number of shows and serials and big TV events, usually Egyptian or other Arab countries, not, sometimes Saudi, but not often. That was the big deal. And, and if you wanted to have entertainment for your family, there's probably something locally. There was probably a small carnival and that sort of thing. And you could go to the desert, and I'm sure there are a million things to do. But there weren't a million things to do. I take that back. There were things to do. But certainly if you were going on vacation with your family, you were probably leaving the country. It's just, this is, when it came out 2019, we've talked about it in 2021, obviously, with terms of the 966, but 2019, we covered it in depth with Sustig Review for sure. It's only grown, it starts, you get started now, it's just a destination place, and it's only grown. And I think it's kind of funny. 2019 season, there were 12 different zones. The theme of it was Imagine. 2021, there were 14 different zones, and the theme of that was Imagine More. And 2022, 15 different zones. Theme of 2022 is Beyond Imagination. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's one reason why Turki Al-Sheikh's job must be fascinating. Wouldn't you love to have a job like this where nobody says no?
Yeah, and your budget is just like unlimited.
Every idea you come with,
I want to throw a months-long party.
I want to see that come to pass. Yep. Make it happen. And so you see it's reflected in this. It's just an extraordinary destination event in Saudi Arabia, not only for Saudis, but people who, outside the country. And I just think it's remarkable how it's grown and how, the commitment they put into it. And it's not a little thing. It's from now, sort of mid-October through March. So there's time for you to get there, and there's all sorts of reasons to get there, because it's a great event, exciting, and no more, than for Saudis, who just have to be beside themselves to have this sort of opportunity and these sort of venues for themselves and their kids.
Well said. I mean, to be able to go out and walk around in the winter, it's really nice in Riyadh, especially during the day. In the summer, you can't even really go outside during the day because it's just dangerously hot. But in the winter, it's pleasant. In the evenings, you can put a jacket on. Richard, they were assembling the Winter Wonderland when I was there a week or two ago, and it just was massive. I mean, it really looks like a very cool fair, and we've seen photos of it, but it looks like it's going to be awesome. I also didn't mention the fireworks display. There's going to be, I think, 75 different fireworks displays over the next coming weeks and months. Looking online now, Richard, I didn't see this before, but just as you were talking, they do some drone art stuff where they fly a bunch of drones up in the air. I think China did this at one of the Olympics recently, but it's like, I'm looking at one that's just, and I'll try to include this, actually, it's a huge picture of MBS, but created with drone lights, and it actually looks amazing. But there's just like a bunch of stuff like this. And
this is what I mean. To be Turki Al-Sheikh, somebody, hey, what about drone art? Yes.
Yeah, but
What
it's
about
like,
a zoo, 190 animals? Yes.
do it. Here's my checkbook. But it's funny. It's like when we go to the beach, Richard, in the summer, or just going to the boardwalk. It's like what there is to do is to sort of walk around and look at stuff and be
Yeah.
with the family and have some games and entertainment and food and stuff like that. This is sort of like that. It's like a boardwalk, a beach boardwalk all over the city for a few months with different things going on. Also, a chance if you're a local entrepreneur, like in the SME sense, to get your restaurant out there, get your food truck out there, your new flavor out there into a large audience. This is a good way to do it. Same goes for artists as well. There are different places where you can display your art, and I know that that's a booming scene in Saudi now. But Richard, that's a great point about this being sort of a nationwide thing. Last year, the numbers on domestic tourism soared because of Riyadh season. People took the local Saudia flight or Flynas flight to Riyadh to spend a weekend there instead of maybe going to Bahrain or Dubai. So just really cool. We will feature, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you've seen it already. We'll feature some photos and art and videos from previous Riyadh seasons, which are pretty impressive. So
Awesome stuff. So
awesome stuff. So Richard, what do you think? Should we get to our interview with Colby?
Absolutely. It's a good one. It's timely, quality 966 content. Enjoy.
If you were here for oil, I hope you listened to what we just talked about, but we're getting into it right now. So here's our interview with Colby Connelly. We are speaking now with Colby Connelly, senior analyst with energy intelligence and a non-resident scholar with Middle East Institute. Colby recently wrote a piece for MEI entitled "Did OPEC Plus Side with Moscow?" We're going to be discussing that with Colby. Colby, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, Colby, I'm really glad to have you on. One of the nice things about the 966 is we can sort of do whatever we want. And we have, we're scheduled out, several weeks to a month, but this was an event happened. But before we get there, I wanted to give a shout out to Energy Intelligence. This is really a well-established outfit. 70 years. I think they first started publishing the Oil Daily in 1951. What's your major focus over there, Colby?
I'm a senior analyst with the firm's research and advisory practice. I'm focused mostly on supply side oil and gas dynamics around the Middle East and North Africa. That includes OPEC, OPEC plus, as well as a lot of energy transition dynamics. But I think there's really only one of those we're here to talk about today.
Well, and I know you're deep in the weeds on this, which is why I'm delighted you can join us today. So, a little something happened last week, October 5th. OPEC plus actually had her first live meeting, in-person meeting since 2020 in Vienna, Austria last week. And the big takeaway was they decided to reduce their quota by 2 million barrels a day, which was a bit of a surprise. I think people were anticipating a cut, but not maybe 2 million barrels. And as we've seen, and through our daily newsletter and through your work, Colby, it created a bit of a political firestorm over here in the U.S. And there's all sorts of things being, in the press and things being said, this and that. The reason we wanted to have you join us today is we sort of want to look at the market, at the dynamics, the actual mechanics of the market, what led to this decision, what might be the outcome. But so with that sort of intro, can you tell us a little bit about OPEC Plus's thinking on this?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll break this down across supply and demand, kind of looking into to 2023, because that's really what this is about. Demand will paint a picture a bit more of where the market dynamics are for next year. I think the key word there will be uncertainty. But then I'll turn to supply, because that will focus on the Russia angle a little bit more, which is that's at the heart of the controversy. So that's the fun part, right? And I just preface also by saying that there's a lot of disagreement about this decision among people that I have a good deal of respect for. So I'll navigate this as delicately as I can and just try to keep it with just the facts here. The first thing I think that we ought to understand, actually, even before I get into the demand side, is that the 2 million barrel per day cut that was announced in Vienna is not an actual 2 million barrel per day cut. it will come closer to probably something in the range of 1 to 1.1 million barrels a day. That has to do with a lot of the actual constraints that the organization has. I'll get into that a bit more on the supply side of things. But running the numbers and looking at where reductions can actually be made from producers that are hitting their quotas each month, we're really looking at something that's closer to 1 million barrels a day. Of course, when you mentioned earlier that a lot of people had expected a much smaller cut, that would have been commensurate with what I'm talking about now, in the sense that we'd have something, if the cut were 1 million barrels a day, it might be, say, closer to 500,000 or even lower than that. So that's really kind of, I think, the story behind some of the sticker shock, so to speak, that we had coming out of Vienna last week. But going into what the market looks like for 2023, there's a lot of volatility and a lot of uncertainty right now that makes forecasting particularly challenging, much more so than it has been in previous years. And I think a lot of people would probably argue that it's even less certain than when we were looking at the sort of COVID rebounds a year or so ago. And I'm trying to explain some of the variables that impacted the OPEC plus perspective here somewhat. So if I'm framing things that way, that doesn't necessarily mean it's our house view. But one of the major things that is impacting the economy more broadly, but oil markets aren't spared, are the interest rate hikes that you're seeing coming from the Fed and other central banks around the world. That's led to a very strong US dollar. Crude oil and a lot of refined products are, as you probably know, traded in US dollars. So this is particularly difficult for large developing countries. The cost of their imports can kind of go up overnight with some of these moves. Similarly, we're looking at possible recessions around the world. I think at the stage we're at now, it's more a question of when rather than if we get there. Recessions are kind of, I think, self-explanatory for their impact on demand, but with a range of opinions on when that's actually going to take place. An organization like OPEC Plus making a decision on supply action is particularly challenging. And in China too, a thing that's had a major impact on demand is these zero COVID lockdowns they've got. That if it hits an industrial region or particularly populous region and shuts everything down, that can take a significant chunk out of oil demand. And it's something that's difficult to predict. I mean, I don't pay a ton of attention to China internally, naturally, but headed into winter with infections, potentially going back up, that's something we may see more of. So China has a huge ripple effect, of course, across oil markets when their demand is impacted.
Well, it's fascinating, I guess, to see the different sides. And so the OPEC's a monthly report came out today. Right. This is the 12th October, and it significantly lowered its global gross domestic product forecast from for 2022. It dropped it from 3.1 to 2.7, from 2023 3.1 to 2.5, and it cited specifically elevated inflation you just talked about, rising interest rates, and geopolitical tensions. IMF just came out with its report, and it moved down its forecast for 2023. We see possible significant COVID lockdowns in Shanghai and Shenzhen, just as you pointed out. There's a lot of things that we don't know how it's going to play out. And from the OPEC side, Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman, the Saudi energy minister, basically said, his quote, "We wanted to give the market guidance. As it is today, we feel much more assured we should give that comfort to the market for 14 months. If things change, we will tweak." All right, so you have this, OPEC is saying, we did this based solely on the fundamentals of the market as we perceive it. In the U.S., it's simply, why are you siding with Russia? And let's break that down. How does this impact Russia? And we'll get into some other aspects of it that might have played into the OPEC plus decision. But how does this impact Russia?
Well, there are some Russia-related demand factors here too, and they are all things that, for maybe for the exception of one, OPEC Plus has really found difficult to try to project the direction of the market with. And I'd also point out that OPEC Plus, or I say OPEC rather, for its internal reports that it produces, I mean, they generally have a different view of the market than a lot of other forecasters, those being IEA or US EIA here. But their projections certainly, I think, have the potential to shape the supply impact quite a bit more. But back to the Russia-related demand factors that I did mention, one of them, which is the more minor one, is something called fuel switching. That's likely to be concentrated in Europe, and that's because of scarcity of natural gas. Obviously, they're certainly not getting anything through the Nord Stream pipeline anymore. And so you'll have power generators that will switch over to liquid fuels, using diesel, maybe in some instances fuel oil. That pushes demand upward. And it may not only happen in Europe with gas markets being tighter. But the things that really do impact Russia here, and that OPEC Plus has been kind of expressing its frustration with, are really a lot of the EU and G7 policies on Russian crude and refined products. So the EU will have embargoes on importing Russian crude that will come into effect later this year, and one on refined products early next year. It's difficult to see exactly how implementation of that is going to go. Nothing like this has ever been done before. And even more volatile really is the potential for the impacts of this G7 price cap. And that's sort of a product of the US Treasury. I think that the design philosophy was to limit Russia's income from oil exports while not totally blowing up the trade of Russian oil. But we just had our annual conference in London last week, the Energy Intelligence Forum, and there were a lot of attendees who were vocal about how confusing this policy is, and some pushback on it just for the amount of confusion that it's created. It's not clear what the implementation of the price cap is going to do to the market just yet, and past the volatility that policy itself may bring. There's likely to be some form of a Russian response to it as well. I mean, Russia's been quite vocal about not selling oil products to countries that implement the cap. So we may be seeing a continued cycle of some of these tit for tat moves here. This is something that's really, I think, kind of highlights the fact that there's growing tension in the global economy right now between major producers and major consumers of energy. That's a theme that I'm not the first one to bring up, but it's growing much more clear, and I think that divide is growing. And we're also going to see, and this will kind of wrap up the demand side of things from my end. But what OPEC Plus has also found difficult, and remember when I say OPEC Plus, that of course includes Russia as well, were the strategic petroleum reserve releases that were authorized by the White House earlier this year. And it seems like we're probably going to get some more now, although it's the SPR is at record low levels, and those releases can only go on for so long. That was a controversial policy to begin with. The SPR releases do add supply to the market, but they don't add long-term production. So they can, in some sense, have an effect of actually putting a floor in a way, but beneath prices sometimes. And bear in mind, finally, too, that the SPR was designed to be used in the event of an actual supply disruption. Whether people should or shouldn't be buying Russian crude and refined products is really not what I'm here to discuss. But from a technical basis, that supply is still out there. It's available. China and India certainly have been enjoying a lot of the discounts they've been getting on it. But the supply is technically there. So it's not as though we're seeing a major outage where, for example, all of Iraq's exports are shut in or something like that. That's not the type of situation we're dealing with here. And finally, there may be some kind of an attempt at a response from Washington to the OPEC Plus decision that's more focused on oil markets than U.S.-Saudi relations. But I think it's really questionable how many policy levers there are to pull there at this point. Maybe more SPR releases. There's been discussion of an export ban on refined products, which I think we'd all certainly hope that the administration quickly comes to its senses on. That would have a lot of difficult impacts on U.S. partners and friendly countries. So that kind of wraps up the demand side, and that goes into it a bit on how Russia is impacted. Getting into the supply side, we do expect that Russian production is going to fall quite substantially next year. Maybe up to the tune of 1.2 million or so barrels a day. It's quite a lot. Russia has been selling discounted crude in Asia, and their response is kind of fine. We'll turn around and sell these things in Asia at a discount, but hang on a second. The market there can only absorb so much. There's eventually an upward limit as to how much is actually necessary. So that's really where things look a bit more from the market view. I can get into the kind of the OPEC Plus dynamics a little bit more and what kind of a role Russia plays there.
You've touched on two things, and you've actually used two terms that I think are good. One was sticker shock, and the other was tit for tat. And I think, again, looking at the firestorm in the U.S., and a lot of it's on the Democratic and congressional side, I don't know that the administration, is talking about, restraining exports, and I'm not sure they're big fans of NOPEC and that sort of thing. But my guess is a lot of people who are writing about this and upset about it probably haven't looked closely at how the Saudis and OPEC Plus perceive that G7 price cap effort. And can you tell us a little bit about it? Because they're basically, from my understanding, I'm not an energy expert, they're going, okay, why would we concede to a consumer group the ability to control and prices? And so what I'm saying, I guess, is I think this is something, a process has been ongoing, and even though they haven't named a price, they haven't set price caps, has been very disturbing, I think, to OPEC Plus. The other thing is, you touched on it, is that a strategic petroleum reserve, which I guess in October is the last, scheduled 1 million barrel per day release, but it could be extended. All those supplies are low. Again, that's something that I think you described really well, was a little irritating to them, because there isn't a supply destruction that might cause for this. But anyway, can you tell us a little bit about that tit for tat part? Because I think things like the EU price caps, SPR situation, these aren't widely understood as to why it might play into OPEC Plus's decision to do what they've done.
Right. Well, I'll kind of start with the price cap, because it's the thing I can at this point probably say the least about, because I've highlighted how confusing it is to everybody. What OPEC Plus doesn't like what it thinks of as interventions into the market. Sure, I suppose there's the argument that OPEC Plus, adding or removing supply is an intervention in and of itself. But be that as it may, their outlook is that they don't like these types of government interventions in the form of, whether that is the price cap, embargoes, sanctions, things like that. I think you've heard language from OPEC Plus ministers, not just those representing Russia, talking about politicization of energy markets, right? That I think encapsulates a lot of their perspective very well, even if we could debate whether or not energy markets are inherently political anyway. But seeing these kinds of moves being made from consumers, it really just increases the friction it increases friction in bilateral cooperation, obviously, as we've seen between Washington and Riyadh in the last few days. But the issue of the supply side is that we tend, I think, in the U.S. to think of OPEC as kind of sitting in this position in the oil market where it's holding all the cards. Obviously, there's a history of a fairly negative perception of OPEC in the United States. That I don't think I'm surprising anybody by saying that. But the reality is that the group also has a lot of constraints of its own. It's not sitting on this totally unassailable position, as I said before, and that's going to influence the decisions that it makes. So what are some of those constraints? Well, we've mentioned, I think, that the quota subject members of OPEC Plus, of which there are around 19 out of the 23 members of the group, they haven't hit their targets on a monthly basis in over a year. It improved somewhat last month, but as of last month, the gap between actual production and targeted production was still in excess of 3 million barrels a day. That's a pretty substantial volume. And that's also the reason you're not seeing a full million barrel a day cut, as I mentioned before. The underperformance had really been led by some of the major West African producers that are members of what I like to refer to as core OPEC, and in other words, the original or core members of OPEC. Mm-hmm. That was really Nigeria and Angola, and they're still really struggling. There are a handful of smaller West African producers, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon, that also add to that. But you're increasingly seeing that on the non-OPEC side. A big part of that has come from Russia. Russia has been, well under 1 million barrels a day in terms of its quota for a couple of months now, as well as Malaysia and Azerbaijan that have struggled to hit targets as well. So what this means is that when the group comes up with a number that it wants to use as part of a market balancing strategy, they really are dealing with a set of numbers that exists only on paper. The quota system that OPEC Plus has been plainly broken for an upwards of a year now, and they may be moving back towards ways to try and address that, to try to fix it. But it is certainly something that they have to deal with, both in terms of how they approach their market strategy and how they think about making decisions long term in the future. And Russia plays a big role here. So it's the accusation, I think, of the black and white OPEC Plus or Saudi Arabia sided with Moscow is extremely reductive, and I can get into some of the numbers on why that is. But I think one of the key messages that I'd want to leave you with today is really that OPEC Plus itself is a lot more constrained in this day and age than we think it is. And so when you heard before Barkindo died, he was kind of railing against underinvestment in upstream oil and gas. You have officials from Saudi Arabia that frequently say the same thing. That's part of the reason they're saying it. It's not just because they want more money for the industry or something like that. It's because they really don't want to be looked at when prices are high and say, well, why can't you raise production? They don't like getting rid of that spare capacity cushion that they talk about. So it's a position that they really don't like being in a way.
Well, it's a drum they beat very loudly and persistently for some time now. I know the energy minister has spoken frequently about it, as well as others, and also the UAE energy minister. They've all talked about underinvestment, and they've all shown real irritation with the U.S. and saying, look, you push the energy transition so hard, you've dissuaded, significant investment in fossil fuels in favor of renewable energy. And you can't be surprised this is where we are, is what they're saying. And also, we don't want to be your whipping boy because this is where we are. Well, and that's the fascinating thing about this, and it's a little frustrating thing about this. The OPEC is saying we made this decision strictly on technical market information and data, and in the U.S. In particular, it's seen solely as political, and clearly there's a communication breakdown, there's a messaging breakdown. And maybe there's some embedded tit for tat of this sort of thing. Like I say, I think the OPEC didn't like the EU price cap, doesn't like the SPR, other things. But they reject the idea that this was all to help Russia, and let's. It'd be interesting to see how this resolves itself. And there's a couple of things that may, in my opinion, but I tend to be optimistic, may help resolve itself. Number one, Congress isn't in session. Number two, when they come back, it is quite possible that the majority minority balance will have shifted. So when these new members do come in January, sometimes things don't happen anytime between that November and January if some things have shifted. But number three, this action was taken a week ago. The Brent price has gone up $1. What you're seeing, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. It may play out exactly how the Saudis see it, in that there's significant reduction in demand that this won't move the price significantly up. We'll see how that goes. I'm not sure if you do forecasting or if you make guesses that way, but it is interesting that it hasn't moved much. Anyway, so what I'm saying is we clearly have a failure to communicate here. We clearly have, in terms of OPEC versus the U.S. and particular parts of the U.S. political structure, completely different takes on this. I guess we'll see what the real impact is over the next few months. But it seems like we're going to have a little hiatus here. We're actually going to get to see what happens to the markets. Would you agree with that?
To an extent, yes. I mean, the price, when these discussions about a potential cut started, it was well before the meeting, and we had gotten to a point where the price had slumped below $90. Flirting with the mid $80 barrel range, and Brent is now above 90 again. I mean, you've heard about the kind of the jawboning effect in the past. I think that got used a lot more when Biden was initially talking about the SPR releases. I mean, I think the price action that you saw immediately after the meeting wasn't particularly notable because that outcome was to a large degree already priced in. There was talk of a cut before the meeting happened. Obviously, the scale was much larger than expected, and it's quite possible. I mean, as the months move on, we're going to see some of these policies come into effect, and we'll see the effects they take. I mean, I think whoever makes the right call on oil from now before, say the first quarter of 2023 is probably going to be dining out on that for a while once they figure out they're right. But that's an interesting point you made about the congressional factor. I mean, I think reading and I'll avoid straying too much into the policy side, but reading some of the commentary that's since come out from the Republican side of the aisle, it doesn't seem like there's as much of an eagerness to turn this into something totally adversarial. I mean, look, it's not to say that nobody was confused by the scale of the cut. It's not that there isn't any room for debate about that. That's certainly not the picture that I want to paint. But the idea that you can say that because this sent prices up, it ostensibly helps Russia. It's a lot more complicated than that. And the quick breakdown for Russia being so critical to OPEC plus is that, I mean, first of all, Russian cooperation with OPEC plus isn't the new thing. It's been around for upwards of 5 years now. The Declaration of Cooperation was renewed at this meeting, so it'll be around more than likely until the end of 2023. But when I was talking before about capacity on paper, OPEC Plus, of the 19 members that are subject to quotas, has around 45.5 million barrels a day. The production baseline, which is not Russia's actual capacity, but it's a number that gets used to determine its quota, is 11.5 million barrels a day. So that accounts for around 25% of OPEC Plus capacity on the whole. When you talk about the non-OPEC members, of which there are 9 that have quotas, that's 15.2 million barrels a day in capacity, again, on paper. But Russia makes up 76% of that. So really, this organization is as something that's attempting to balance the markets or influence the markets. It's not viable without Russia. Especially when you add up the volume losses I mentioned earlier from West African producers, and the fact that 3 of really OPEC's kind of legacy members are not subject to quotas. Libya is not. There are periodic supply disruptions that come from Libya that really have affected their reliability. I mean, if you look at a line chart of Libyan production since 2011, you can almost get whiplash going up and down. You've got some certainly some discussion of maybe lifting sanctions on Venezuela. But they're mostly offline, and Iran, as we all know, is heavily sanctioned. So those are 3 fairly large capacity producers that OPEC Plus can't really factor into its market balancing strategy, because they are either under sanctions, they're offline, or we just don't know where their production is going to be. So that capacity being so much lower than what's on paper is really critical, especially given that 11.5 million barrel a day number is no longer applicable for Russia. It's probably at least 1 million barrels a day lower than that now, which, if anything, to a degree, makes them more critical for the group. I mean, I'm not, again, to clarify, I'm not sitting here arguing whether they should or should not be there. These are just simply the numbers behind why they are. If you're looking at things purely from a market-oriented focus, it's certainly not unanimous that the OPEC Plus decision was a totally technical decision. Of course, that's going to be the public line. I don't want to present the idea that the decision they made is something that people who do look at the market very often are going to go say, oh, yeah, that makes sense, because there was a lot of confusion. I think the scale of it was a big part of that. But the other thing, I think, that one final point, and I'll just leave it at this, is that bear in mind they do have a meeting coming up on December 4th, and they will still be meeting, even though this production policy has been extended until the end of 2023. That doesn't mean it's going to remain unchanged. I mean, if they see fundamentals shifting in a way they don't like, they will add supply. I don't think any decision that OPEC Plus ever makes is totally disconnected from politics. I mean, how could it be? You have to get like 23 oil ministers together and get them to agree on something, right? There's of course there's going to be politics. It's not rocket science. But I think where it gets so hyperbolic for me is the idea that it's like being done directly to influence the midterms and stuff. I mean, even if that's maybe Riyadh sees that as a fringe benefit. I don't know, but I mean, it's such an enormous decision in terms of world oil markets. Like it's hard to see a congressional election being front and center there.
Colby Connelly, senior analyst with Energy Intelligence and a non-resident scholar at the Middle East Institute. Colby, thank you so much for joining us. Great discussion. We really appreciate it.
Oh, great. It was great talking with the both of you. And again, thank you for thinking of me and having me on.
That was our interview with Colby Connelly. Really great discussion. You can watch all of these interviews, segments on YouTube if you want to just get one part of the pie instead of eating the whole pie. We don't care. We're all good with it. But that was really great. Thanks to Colby for joining us.
Yeah, shout out to Colby. He joined us on short notice, and we've known that he's a quality analyst, and you can tell here, thoughtful, informed. It was really a good conversation.
Mm-hmm. And we checked the oil box, Richard. So we got a big check with a big pen. So we've got that covered. Richard, what do you think? Let's get to Yallah.
Saudi in a minute. All right, number one. Women no longer required to bring male guardian to Hajj and Umrah. Saudi Arabia has made the historic decision to allow women to attend the Hajj and Umrah pilgrimages without a mahram or male guardian. Speaking at the Saudi embassy in Cairo, Tawfiq Al-Rabia, who we know, former Minister of Commerce, quite capable guy, also former Minister of Health, currently Saudi Arabia's Minister of Hajj and Umrah, said, quote, "A woman can come to the kingdom to perform Umrah without a mahram," unquote. The announcement ends a decades-long rule imposed by Saudi Arabia, although exemptions have been given to females attending the Hajj or Umrah pilgrimage with large groups of other women.
Yeah, this is a small step for women in Saudi Arabia. It's also a small step for men in Saudi Arabia. If they, don't want to go and don't want to be the mahram, then they don't have to, which is cool. This isn't going to get a lot of press, Richard, but this is significant, and this is significantly impactful for some who, don't have a mahram that's physically able, or there's a lot of stuff going on. So this is very cool. Yeah, Dr. Tawfiq Al-Rabia is a really brilliant guy, and in a good spot here with the Ministry of Hajj and Umrah. But yeah, this is interesting.
It is, and people will focus on the human rights aspect of this. It's a good one. It's important, and that sort of thing. But there's also the Saudi Arabia is trying to set up an environment where doing the Hajj or Umrah is much easier. I mean, they've centralized their booking through the Nusk, and they've got some new digital platforms. They're trying to really formalize and rationalize and make things easier if you want to book a trip and get there and stay. This is a big impediment. So 50% of the 50% of the Muslim population, you can't just go, all right, I need to find a date. I need to earn some money, set aside some money to do this trip that's extremely meaningful to me. And oh, by the way, I have to find a guardian or someone to go along with me, which just complicates it even more. So for, the world, it makes it much easier to get there. I think it's important to point out that in Saudi Arabia in 2019, so 3 years ago, women, were given the permission. They no longer needed the permission of a male guardian to travel. So that this really doesn't apply so much to Saudi women. It applies more to Muslim women all over the world, and it's an important step.
We talked recently, Richard, I think it was either last week or the week before, about using AI in the Hajj and Umrah to sort of make it a better experience for all of those doing it. And, it's just little changes like this along the way, incremental stuff that is going to add up to a much better experience, like you just described, than maybe in 2015 or 2014, when it was just like, a very big ordeal to do. So a lot of investment going into that, and it's good to see this. It's also interesting that he made the sort of announcement, very straightforward announcement from the Saudi embassy in Cairo, which I guess he was visiting for professional reasons, but just an interesting story here. So
it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting too. A lot of the AI and other things is they're trying to make the experience safer. So they're understanding traffic flows and managing crowds and any number of things that AI might give you a leg up on. If you eliminate the mahram, that also adds a security aspect that you have to be alert to. So you've got a lot of unaccompanied women in the midst. Let's say if it's a Hajj, 2.5 million. But if it's the Umrah and the Hajj over the course of the year, it's 8 to 10 million. So you've got a lot of unaccompanied women you have to make sure are safe. And and they can have an experience that without feeling threatened or harried or harassed or anything, because it's not, in this milieu, it's not just Saudis, it's from people from all over the world. Mm-hmm. And some pilgrims, even though it's an important religious and spiritual event, may interact with women, unaccompanied women, in a way that's not acceptable. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is any decision has consequences. As opposed now to a woman who might be coming with their brother, their husband, their son, they're now unaccompanied, and you have to make sure they're safe and they feel safe. Especially because this is, and if you want to make the Hajj and Umrah really attractive and have more people come, you need to make sure your public relations and you can't have bad events or bad reporting or things that go wrong. You really want to be alert to that. So anyway, all I'm saying is any little decision has other consequences. This is a big decision. It'll have big ramifications, and I'm sure they'll address it. I'm sure they're aware of it.
Yeah, and Richard, this transitions to the next Yallah number 2 very well. But I don't know if you've seen the documentaries on Netflix on Woodstock. I think 69 and Woodstock, specifically Woodstock 99.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. I actually watched it on the flight back a few weeks ago and was just blown away. I mean, managing huge crowds of people is very, very difficult for festivals or concert or not. Man, what a nightmare that was. Still have nightmares watching that. That's not really my scene anyway. The music looked great. The experience looked bad. So yeah, I mean, Saudi does that annually, but with 2.5 million people. So it's kind of amazing. Yallah number 2, Netflix has previewed a selection of upcoming films and shows aimed at the Arab world and hailing from Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, Egypt, and Jordan. The global platform has been steadily making inroads into the Middle East and North Africa since 2015 in the face of fierce competition from local players such as MBC's Shahid VIP and Stars Play. The new productions, mainly due to launch in 2023, include a Saudi Arabian feature, Al-Khalat Plus, a satirical suspense film based on the hit online show Al-Khalat, which was first released in 2017 and received more than 1.5 billion views across YouTube and social media. Whoa, cool.
1.5 billion, that's a big one. Yeah, this is, the first your one big thing was Riyadh season, which we pointed out was introduced in 2019, and it's fun to see it now. The third season, it gets bigger and bigger and more attractive, and now Saudis are accustomed to it. I mean, this Netflix Telfaz 11 agreement was signed in November 2020, so just under 2 years ago, and here they are. The agreement at that time was 8 new films, and they're coming out with a couple now, because they also announced a second Telfaz 11 feature, The Matchmaker. Billed as a psychological thriller film with a supernatural slant. The film is set against the backdrop of the rocky desert landscape of the World Heritage Site of Yallah. So that's pretty cool. I mean, 2020, you sign it, and now you've got a Netflix, a couple Netflix shows coming out. One of them, shot in Yallah. It's just this is how progress is achieved. You just keep moving forward, and you set things in motion, and then you start seeing results.
Yeah, and hopefully you discover a larger audience outside of the region with these films getting into English subtitles. I know that was big for Latin American films in the last decade or so, even more than that, obviously. But like one of Netflix's biggest shows is Narcos, and it's completely in Spanish, which is interesting, or primarily in Spanish. So very, very interesting stuff.
I want to add on this a little addendum on Netflix, as Netflix and Saudi-based SPT, which is Studio Production Training, have teamed up to launch what's called Below the Line KSA, which is a development program that will help train and upskill 15 young talents in Saudi Arabia on set training and workshops focused in the art department and production roles. A big, one of the things we've tried to talk about on this show is that it's encouraging to see Saudi Arabia, when they look at something, they're just not going, okay, we want a relationship, we want to do a film with Netflix, or we want NBC does this or that. We want to build a whole ecosystem. And part of that is training young Saudis, so you can actually come to Yallah and film with Saudi talent, all the way from a grip to a videographer to all the technical aspects, set design, and this sort of thing. So it's interesting to see they're trying to backfill not only from the marquee stuff, but all the way down to the operational implementation stuff. stuff. That's quite informative, but
Stuff.
you understand what I'm saying. They're
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to make it a whole ecosystem, because also inevitably, this kind of getting into this sector is not only there's a showcase part of it, and there's the satisfaction of seeing something that has Saudi creativity out to the world, but it's also, we need to create jobs too. We want to see it create jobs and build technical capabilities and skills within our citizens. So anyway, it's a nice up and down sort of approach.
Yeah, and Netflix sees a huge market in the region. That's why they're doing this and why they're making the investments, which is very cool. So
Number
good
three,
stuff.
Saudi Arabia's industrial production rises by 16.8% in August. Saudi Arabia's industrial production increased by 16.8% in August compared to the same period a year ago. This is according to the General Authority for Statistics. The growth in IPI, Industrial Production Index, is primarily driven by high production in three subsectors: mining and quarrying, manufacturing, and electricity and gas supplies. The growth of the IPI turned positive in May 2021 and has been growing continuously since then. This comes after negative trends witnessed during 2019 and 2020 due to the impacts of the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, this just kind of speaks to the momentum the Saudi economy has right now, and then what's driving the momentum. So, according to the same report, Richard, which was in Arab News and cited the report that you mentioned in GA Stat, which is a lot more detailed, but mining and quarrying grew by 15.5% in August from a year ago. And that's sort of tied into as the kingdom increases oil production to its highest levels, 11 million barrels per day in August, excuse me. When compared with July 2022, mining and quarrying witnessed a month-on-month growth of 2.2% in IPI activity. Richard, we've talked a little bit about the Hanagia mining operation just awarding its bidders. Mining and minerals is massive in Saudi Arabia now. It's a new kind of renewed focus for Ma'aden and the government. So they're pleased to see this data.
Absolutely. And it sort of speaks for itself. They're on a nice run here. It's actually slowed down a little bit over the last 4 months. It hit a 26 year on year growth high in April 2022. So it's coming down a little bit from that, which is understandable. But yeah, it's great to see it in things like mining and quarrying and manufacturing and electricity and gas. These are sectors that they want to see grow, and they're two of them are non-oil largely. So it's a good report, and they got to make hay while they can, because I think they're counter-cyclical in terms of what's going on in the rest of the world. They're growing, the rest of the world is contracting. They want to see this last as long as possible.
Yeah, and to that point, the IPI has slowed for the fourth month in a row. So it was hot. It's slowing down a little bit, still growing, but yeah, they want to see it keep it going. So yeah, interesting. Richard, Yallah number four. It's amazing how quickly you lose track. Venture capital funding for MENA startups hits 2.3 billion and is on track to beat the 2021 total. Venture capital funding for startups in the Middle East and North Africa rose 20% annually to more than $2.3 billion in the first 3 quarters of 2022, putting it on track to potentially surpass the total investments attracted in 2021. This is according to a study carried out by Magnet. Funding reached $512 million in the third quarter, which was the lowest since the first quarter of 2021. Magnet said in its quarterly update, citing global economic and geopolitical factors. That, however, put total funding in 2022 at more than 80% of the 2021 level, leaving the industry with a full quarter to match or even surpass last year's total of about 2.8 billion.
Yeah, good story. We love Magnet. They do great work. It's real insights into the VC environment in the region, and it's a little bit like the IPI we just talked about, in that it's on track for a record year, another great year. It slowed down a little bit last quarter. So just for Saudi, they talk about the key retail, basically the key sectors are retail, services, e-commerce, and government. again, Egypt, UAE, and Saudi Arabia all retain the three top positions in terms of funding value and numbers of deals. Fintech, leading industry during the period, 94 deals valued at 747 million. So what they're saying is that, you know, they set a record in 2021. They're on track, even though the third quarter was a little slower. That was 2 point that they're on track to beat the record. What I found most interesting about this report was, Magnet has a little graph, and maybe we can include it when we do the segment. A 4-year venture funding evolution in Saudi Arabia. So through 3 quarters in 2019, 25 million. Through 3 quarters in 2020, 7 million. Obviously, we know why. Through 3 quarters in 2021, 224 million. But here's the interesting thing about that. 99 million of that, or roughly 125 million of that, were mega deals over $100 million, right? So of that 224 million, a little over half were mega deals. 2022 through Q3, 232 million total. So, you know, ahead of the 2021, but a distinct difference in terms of mega deals. $32 million of deals were under 100 million. 199 million were deals of over 100 million, which is, you know, as compared to 2021, about 75 million more is mega deals, which is a reflection of a maturing market. I mean, you have companies now who not only can get valued, but also they can get funding of this amount. So it's a really encouraging trend. And it speaks to how the market is maturing, and how these fintechs, not fintechs alone, but how these startups are gaining in valuation. And it's an interesting progression, an important one.
Yeah, I mean, it's just good data points there, Richard. I think what's interesting is right now, like you mentioned, just like the IPI, it's starting to slow a little bit, and this is not really a good time for that to happen. They've just started getting some of these startups going. The investment is starting to hit the right fever pitch. You don't want it to slow down with the global economy when these startups need their follow-on funding round. So you want to make sure that the government is there to support during this time. Richard, actually, a guest we had on the show a few months back, Amjad Ahmed, who was just he's a VC guy in the region. Really was a great discussion with him. He shared a Wall Street Journal article. We'll include a link to it as well, sort of on the funding boom in the Middle East and how it's cooling down a little bit. Talks about, Amjad Ahmed actually says on LinkedIn, I'm just going to quote it, government economic reforms and funding support have been essential to the growth of entrepreneurship and venture capital, and will be critical in sustaining the momentum through this downturn. Great founders continue to build companies, so supporting them by lowering costs and barriers during this challenging period will lead to a more resilient ecosystem. He's sort of talking about, we've got to keep the funding going. This momentum needs to continue, and there can't just be a throttle back, because the ecosystem is very immature compared to Silicon Valley, Germany, France, other areas where startup ecosystems are much stronger. So you don't want it to sort of, as a very young, growing plant, which still kind of weak. Yeah, just sort of playing out. So interesting times. I mean, good data, and it does show that there's money going in and there's excitement in VC in the region, but it can't just go to sleep and have all these VCs hold on to dry powder during this time.
Number 5, Saudi Arabia leaps ahead in World University Rankings 2023. Times Higher Education released the results of its World University Rankings 2023, which showed the UK's University of Oxford retaining its top spot for the 7th straight year. King Abdulaziz University has risen from 190 in 2022 to a joint 101 spot in the 2023 table, making it the highest ranked university in the Middle East and achieving the best ranking ever by a Middle Eastern university in this table. Quote, not only has King Abdulaziz University risen dramatically to move within a whisker of the world top 100 to lead the entire MENA region, but other leading institutions have also made strong progress, and Saudi Arabia's overall representation in the world rankings has increased from 15 universities ranked last year to 21 this year.
Enormous progress for Saudi Arabia's higher education sector. Richard, we had a different Abdulaziz Al-Nazi, Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Nazi on our program last week from King Saud University, recent winner of a very prestigious water prize. Sort of talked with him a little bit about the changes going on just at his local university. But this is just impressive. This is part of a longer haul strategy from Saudi as part of Vision 2030. And it's one of the ways it's really sort of a demonstrable progress is the maturity of its higher education sector.
He mentioned, and he talked specifically about essentially the resources that are available to him. We talked about research and development as opposed to his experience at the University of Cincinnati, where he was part of a team that won the Prince Salman International Water Prize. Big prize, creativity prize, really an honor. And he spoke very positively about at King Saud University the resources that are available to him in terms. And he said two things. He said instrumentation, and what was the second thing?
Oh man, now I'm blanking.
Yeah. So, but we have to go. But instrumentation, obviously just the equipment to do it, and I think at that point he talked about the quality of his students. Maybe it had to be with the talent. Essentially, this isn't a wordy word, but instrumentation and talent. And so, and he talked about how impressive the students he has to work with now. And obviously this is reflected in this Times of Higher Education. By the way, Times Higher Education is something that they really look at and they like to see because it's a ranking that's been done for years and it's highly regarded. I thought it'd be interesting to, so they were talking about global, Abdulaziz just outside the 100 top 100 and increased numbers of universities ranked overall in the Arab world. THE Times Higher Education also does a ranking. So in the Arab world, top universities in the Arab world, Saudi Arabia, King Abdulaziz University 1, King Fahd University of Petroleum and Minerals 2, Qatar University 3, King Saud University, where Dr. Abdulaziz Al-Nazi is a professor, 4, University of Sharjah, UAE, 5, United Arab Emirates University, 6, Abu Dhabi University, 7, Al Faisal University, which is part of the King Faisal Foundation universe, which is extraordinarily impressive. At 8, Imam Muhammad bin Saud Islamic University as 9, and then the American University of Beirut. So out of that top 10, let me go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of the top 10 in the Arab are in Saudi Arabia.
That's impressive. That's awesome. Good stuff. Richard, Yallah number 6, rounding us out here for the week, episode 62. Saudi health plans 100 partnership projects worth $13 billion. Saudi Arabia has announced a major plan to involve the private sector in 100 health projects over the next 5 years, resulting in $13 billion in investment opportunities. The initiatives announced by Saudi Health for public-private partnerships include the operation of 2 new medical cities, a project to provide 900 beds for medical rehab and long-term care facilities, as well as restructuring 200 primary care centers and providing air medical evacuation services. This is according to Saudi Arabia's Health Minister Fahad Al-Jalajil. Sorry about the name.
Yeah, I think you got that, Fahad Al-Jalajil. And just part of that story, the ministry has restructured the procedures for issuing license and related regulations to ease investors' journey. And it recently launched a call center to provide services for the medical business sector. We've talked about it, and there's not a lot to say on this. It was included because it's interesting, a very important sector, interesting data point. So much of this 2030 progress and ultimate success is how much the private sector can be involved in, and the PIF plays an important role in the economy. Early in on key sectors, loss leader investor on key sectors, really trying to grow sectors and segments and that sort of thing. And there's always a concern that it'll crowd out private sector. So it's always good to see things like this whereas a very concerted effort to make sure that these assets are going to be available, these opportunities, investment opportunities are going to be available, and specifically are available to the private sector, because that's a key part of the progression of the Saudi economy.
Mm-hmm. Richard, nothing else to add to that. Great episode today. Depending on where you're listening to us, if you're listening to us or watching us on YouTube, we appreciate it very much. Richard, thank you very much. Good one.
Awesome. Thank you to all our listeners in 52 countries and growing, on 29 podcast platforms and growing, and our YouTube subscribers are blowing up. It's thank you.
Yes, thank you. And see you next week.